I'm starting to wonder if it's the sack that because Randy uses his, it's okay, I guess, overnight, and that's the one I'm using right now. Yeah.
Oh, you better put something out? Yeah. Hey, how are you?
It is possible, so maybe we should check it back. Right. No biggie. Okay. Yeah.
I can do a mix. I could go over the back. Yeah.
We still don't know if the Venus was there.
I figure I'm not that way. Right. He's like, well, I didn't say no.
Oh, yeah.
We can hear some. And put the other seat on the other side of him.
No, no.
I'm just thinking about how like people are gonna get that food.
Yeah, true.
Just sit right there, past.
Here I'm doing now.
Hey, Jess.
Hey, how are you? I'm just trying to find Page's water box. Which I believe is right there.
Sure, the water?
Do you mind passing me that cup? Thank you very much.
Can I get anybody else anything? Anybody need a white balance real quick? Let me take one. How are your knees, Jeff?
As they get older, it's harder.
That was right.
So you're gonna fire against the family here?
What?
I think the family's sitting there.
Yeah, I think they're more
That's
famous.
where we're happy is with the families.
All right. Any suggestions on musicians?
You can stand.
The back with the other schmucks.
All right. Come earlier next time, Mark.
Sure.
That'll be it. But yeah, otherwise you'll be out.
Does anybody need extra time to set up, or can I bring folks in?
I think we're ready. Yeah, anybody else? You good?
Okay.
It looks like, no, it's almost better than better.
Or the lobby.
Kristen, you good? You guys all good?
Yep. Yes, thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Mark, if you're gonna sit there, you have to actually be the AG now.
I expect three
That's the
lawsuits.
rule.
I expect 3 lawsuits.
But you don't
for
get
this
it.
one.
Mark, any update on TikTok?
Very, very briefly of law school.
You chose the correct path.
I believe I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just a wall, but I think you're just looking at the wall.
You can't, you mean Tom can't find space to...
The walls can work out.
Yeah, we take
Thanks, everybody. I know it's a little tight, but
Yeah, you're
the
ready.
old office is a little bigger.
The building.
Taz, you look very comfortable there. General, nice to see you. General, would you hold him in my nose? We told him he has to take on the TikTok case. He wasn't there yesterday for that. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Before we get started, I want to say a couple of words. First, to acknowledge the suffering in the Ukraine today, over the past weeks, and the tremendous loss and sacrifice that we're seeing. We're here to talk about loss and sacrifice and suffering today, but we're feeling it all over the world. And I know that all of us have our minds on the people of Ukraine and that we stand with them. And I also want to start by acknowledging the families that are with us today. We've been through a lot together. Not everybody could make it, but when I became Attorney General, one of the very first things I did in the old office, which was a little bigger, I'm sorry, was to sit with families, victims, and survivors, some of whom are here today. And I want to acknowledge Liz Fitzgerald, who's sitting right here, and her family. We're going to hear from Liz later and hear about Matt and Kyle and their friend Michael. Paige Niver, thank you so much, Paige, for being here. Paige was there in that first meeting back in the old building. Paige was with us when we announced the distributor settlement and Johnson & Johnson settlement. Her husband John is here, and I want to thank them for being here and for sharing their story, and for their incredible courage. You know, what they've been through cannot be expressed in words. And the sacrifices that they have made as families, some of them have lost so much that can never be recovered. And their suffering continues. And even though they may have people in their families who are in recovery, that is a walk that we will take with them for the rest of their lives, right? And that is why what we're doing here today is so important. And I want to thank Maria Skinner and the McCall Center, who is one piece of that, part of a huge community of support and services and treatment that helps the Niver family and the Fitzgerald family and so many other families across the state and this country. So thank you again, all of you, for your work on this. So I'm here today to announce that because of our efforts and the efforts of our sister states, Connecticut will force Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers to pay $6 billion for their role in the opioid and addiction crisis. This represents a 40% increase over the $4.3 billion settlement announced 6 months ago that I strongly objected to, that I appealed, and that Connecticut successfully overturned in court. Before I go forward, let me just say $6 billion is a lot of money. $26 billion is a lot of money. And in just the past year alone, Connecticut has recovered, along with our sister states, more than $32.5 billion that will go to treatment and prevention and to help victims and survivors and their families. And that is a historic sum. But there's not enough money in the world to care for all the people that need it. And there's not enough justice that can be produced to make it right. Right? There just isn't. And so we have to acknowledge that. But we also acknowledge, and I think Maria would be the first to tell you, that hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into Connecticut starting this year will go a long way to fund treatment and prevention and local services like the McCall Center and help these families, but also help make sure that no other families join us, right, in this discussion. So let me quickly set the table. I don't have to tell you the whole saga. All of you know that Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family played a singular role in starting and fueling the opioid and addiction crisis. They did it from our state. They did it from my home city of Stamford, Connecticut. And people say to me, well, William, you're the home state attorney general. What does that mean to you? And I have said all along, that means that I have a special obligation to be aggressive. And before me, Attorney General Blumenthal and Attorney General Jepsen had a special obligation to be aggressive. And that's why they were part of the effort to get Purdue to pay a historic $600 million fine then, sounds almost quaint, in 2007, and 3 executives pled guilty to federal criminal charges. That was the moment when Purdue and the Sacklers could have started to do the right thing, right? They knew they had helped to start this fire, and it was then that they could have helped us put it out. But instead, after 2007, the Sacklers poured gasoline on this fire. And now it rages across the state and across this country. They blamed victims, they targeted doctors who were overprescribing pills, they supplied pill mills. Everybody knows what they did. They made it worse, and people died. Just last year, 1,400 families were wrecked by this crisis. Almost all of those families related to the opioid and addiction crisis. That number continues to go up. More than $10 billion in damage every year to this state. That number continues to go up. And it happened here. And that's why it was so important that Connecticut play a central role. So 6 months ago, well, actually, right after I became Attorney General, we had sued Purdue, we had sued the Sacklers. There were some initial discussions, and the Sacklers offered sums that I knew on its face were insufficient, just a few billion dollars. And so I pushed hard. And I pushed hard until there was a settlement on the table of $4.3 billion over 9 years. And I said, that's not enough. That doesn't cut it. And for a long time, I was able to convince many of my colleagues to hold out and to demand more justice from the Sacklers. But unfortunately, over time, much of that resistance became untenable for some of my colleagues. And in the end, the Sacklers and a majority of states, and frankly creditors, including victims and survivors and their families, agreed to a settlement of $4.3 billion over 9 years. And that was part of a plan of reorganization, a bankruptcy plan for Purdue Pharma. Now, at that time, I objected on a number of grounds. I objected, number one, that $4.3 billion over 9 years doesn't do it, right? It doesn't come close to forcing the Sacklers to pay. And on top of that, they were using the bankruptcy process to shield themselves, right? When they themselves are not bankrupt. Nobody thinks for a second the Sacklers have no money. So I said no. Over my objections and the objections of 8 other states and the District of Columbia, there was just 9 of us left. Judge Drain in the Southern District of New York confirmed a plan of reorganization for Purdue Pharma that included the $4.3 billion settlement. And I said, this is not justice. that the Sacklers have to pay more for the death and destruction that they have caused. And I said the Sacklers need to apologize. They need to issue a fresh apology. They need to get out of the opioid business completely, and Purdue has to get shut down. The Sackler name has to come down. Wherever there's a museum or a university or a hospital and they want to take the Sackler name down, they have to be allowed to do so. And victims and survivors should have an opportunity to be heard in court, and the Sacklers should be made to listen. And victims and survivors should have the opportunity to tell the Sacklers how much damage they have caused. And when I said that 6 months ago, the Sacklers said, no way, not a penny more. And other states and many other advocates said, that is never going to happen. You are not going to get any more money. This is a total waste of time. But I knew the Sacklers could do more, and I knew the law was on our side. So I continued to fight and fight. And after the plan was confirmed, I led the fight to appeal, overturn the settlement, and overturn the plan. And at that point, when I filed our appellate briefs, people still said, you're nuts. There's no way you're going to win. There's no way the law is on your side. You're going to lose, and this is all going to be for naught. And then we won. And it was a huge victory for justice and accountability, and for Matt, and for Kyle, and for Michael, and for Paige and her family, and so many people across Connecticut and our country. So after we overturned the plan of reorganization and vacated the settlement, the court ordered us to mediate. And so I was forced to sit down with 8 other states and the District of Columbia. And over the last couple of months, we mediated almost every day and well into the evening on most days. And as I sat at that table, I demanded all of those things that people said we could not get. And I looked them in the eye and told them and the Sacklers' lawyers that there was no way there could be a resolution here unless they moved significantly from where they were, and they acknowledged and recognized their role in the opioid and addiction crisis, and they started to do the right thing, okay? I want them to start to do the right thing, because I don't think anybody is under any illusion that this solves all of the problems that we are facing, and that the Sacklers, it doesn't matter how much money they have, they can never repay all of us for the damage and destruction that they have caused. But as a result of our negotiations and staying at the table and pushing really hard, we were able to force the Sacklers to give more than $1.6 billion more on top of the 4.3 to get us to a total recovery of $6 billion. As I said before, that's 40% more than where we were 6 months ago. The Sacklers will issue a fresh apology. The Sackler name will come down anywhere a university or a museum or a hospital wants it to come down. I expect that, based on the court's representations, that victims and survivors and families will have the chance to be heard in Judge Drain's courtroom, and that members of the Sackler family will be forced to listen. They have to get out of the business of opioids and prescription pain medication, not just in this country but around the world. They have to sell their international businesses and divest, and Purdue has to get shut down. A couple of other thoughts. When I took the appeal, some critics said, this is just about states. It's just about states trying to get more money. Frankly, offensive to all of us, and offensive to the people who told me to keep fighting. right? That decision was not made by me alone. That was made by Liz and Paige and many others who said, William, let's keep going. This isn't right. And so it wasn't just about states. And this agreement, I made sure, authorizes Connecticut to create a Connecticut Opioid Survivors Trust, a way to get money to support and serve victims, survivors, and their families. You may be asking, what about those non-consensual, non-debtor releases we've heard so much about, right? This is the legal issue that allowed the Sacklers, who are not bankrupt, to go into the bankruptcy of Purdue Pharma and buy themselves a lifetime of immunity. I still think that's wrong. Connecticut still thinks that's wrong. And that fight will continue. We do not acknowledge that non-consensual, non-debtor releases are lawful or permissible, and have not. And so what will happen, we expect, is that even though Connecticut is part of this agreement that we're announcing today, the Department of Justice, we expect, will continue that fight in the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And I have reserved the right, if this ends up in the Supreme Court, Connecticut will be able to speak on this issue again and will be able to oppose non-consensual, non-debtor releases. I will continue to support Senator Blumenthal and his call for criminal charges at the federal level. Nothing in this agreement forecloses criminal charges against any member of the Sackler family or anyone responsible at Purdue or otherwise. And so that continues to be an outstanding question and possibility. This was the effort, this is the result of the efforts of an extraordinary team here in the Office of the Attorney General. And I want to first acknowledge Special Counsel for Opioids, Matt Fitzsimmons, standing right there. Matt has not slept in a week, basically. And he's been extraordinary. Other Assistant Attorneys General, Deputy Associate Attorney General Jeremy Perlman, Assistant Attorneys General Sarah Nadeem, Anne-Marie DeGrafton-Wright, John Wright, Alma Nunley, Legal Investigator Kaylee Ribeiro, Paralegal Specialist Lynn Rio, Cheryl Turner, Administrative Assistant Melissa Gordon, prior Special Counsel for Opioids, now Judge Kim Massacott, and retired Assistant Attorneys General Eleanor Mullen are all responsible for this result. I also want to acknowledge Solicitor General Claire Kindle, who was a one-woman wrecking ball on appeal when we overturned the plan of reorganization and the prior settlement. And Irv Goldman from the law firm of Pullman and Comley, who is outside bankruptcy counsel for the state of Connecticut. I don't have to tell you that bankruptcy law is a whole different animal, and it's not something that many people understand or a world that we work in every single day, and we couldn't have done this without Irv. So I want to thank Irv so much. And Sam Klein, thank you so much for your extraordinary work. Mike Skold, Deputy Solicitor General, has also been working on the briefs lately. I should also note the Deputy Attorney General, who is representing me at other meetings right now, Peggy Chappell, has done extraordinary work. So you've heard enough from me, but this is not about, it's obviously not about just the Office of the Attorney General and the extraordinary staff, but this is all about families and survivors and victims and the people that we've lost. And I want to ask Liz Fitzgerald to share her thoughts about Matt and Kyle. And Christine Gagnon couldn't be here today. She's in training, but she lost her son Michael. And I just wanted to invite Liz to say a few words.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And as you know, Christine and I both weren't for the bankruptcy in the way that they could use the system to get out. Not any amount of money will ever be restitution for what they've done, the damage to Sacklers, of course. My son Kyle was prescribed OxyContin when it was before the $6 million deal. And it was when it was safe. He developed a liking and an addiction that lasted for 9 years before we lost him in March 2013. His brother Matthew was able to, I guess, again, kids were bringing it to school and experimenting with a pill that they had no idea that it would destroy the rest of their lives. We lost Matthew on Labor Day 2017 to a fentanyl overdose. I commend you for all the work and effort that you've done. I know Christine and I have been working with you with the kids and in the kids' names, Michael, Matt, and Kyle, and we really appreciate all your efforts and your fight. It's not the outcome that we would always expect, but hopefully that these monies will be put to good use to help fight and help others that are suffering. And thank you so much for recognizing the families, because my 3 children have lost 2 brothers, and I think that a lot more needs to be done to support families because of the traumatic PTSD. They just destroyed our lives.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Paige, you've been at more of these than you would like to be at, I am sure. And no one wants to be part of this club. But I want to thank you for your courage and strength, and for your daughter's strength. And if you want to share a few words as well.
Sure. Hi. My daughter became addicted to opioids when she was just 14 years old. She had had a bicycle accident and knocked her teeth out and was prescribed copious amounts of opioids. As a mother, I did what the doctor told me to do. I just kept giving them to her, and when they were starting to kind of have a lesser effect, they said, oh, well, then you need to give her more. And that's exactly what I did. But unfortunately, the day of the bicycle accident was the last time I saw my daughter sober for 9 long years. And in that 9 long years, things went downhill drastically. I'm happy to say that she is in recovery. I also would like to thank you for your work on this, because when I started this process and I first met the Attorney General's office, my only sole goal was to make sure that no other families had to endure the suffering that we had gone through as a family and that she had gone through as a victim. I knew something was wrong. I think the parents knew something was wrong long before lots of people caught wind of it, and I never thought I'd see any justice for it. So the money will do so much good. I fund as much treatment and prevention as possible, because if it can save anybody from my family's pain, and certainly Liz's family's pain, which is far greater than mine, that would be money well spent. Mm-hmm. So we appreciate your efforts for sure, and your continued fight.
Thank you. So you've heard a lot about treatment and prevention. Almost all of this money will go to treatment and prevention. As I said earlier, I do hope and will push hard to create a trust so that some of this money, some of the new money that I successfully negotiated will go to helping and serving and supporting victims and survivors. Parents, brothers and sisters have been left behind. Children have been left behind. Grandchildren have been left behind. And more will be left behind. And we need to have those supports in place. I am certain that as long as I have the honor of being your Attorney General for however long that is, I will be working on the opioid and addiction crisis. It is the worst public health crisis in America, COVID notwithstanding. And it will be with us long after, we hope, COVID is in the rearview mirror. Let me also say that there's a temptation to conflate all of these things together. Distributors, Johnson & Johnson, Purdue, Sacklers. It's not all one case. It's one big effort, and it's not over, okay? And so when we finish this announcement, we'll go back to work. There are yet more wrongdoers to be held accountable who are part of the addiction industry, and we will go after them with everything that we have. and we will try to get more resources for services and places like the McCall Center. And it's because of that I want Maria to share a few words about what this will mean to people that you serve.
Thank you, General Tong. To me, this is a story about pain, and today is about mitigating pain.
Yeah.
And you know what our nation was sold was a story that these medications were designed to mitigate pain, and yet here we are. And I think, you know, I'm a clinical social worker. I'm CEO at the McCall Center for Behavioral Health, and the business that we're in is healing pain, but a different kind of pain. And what happened over the course of time was that recognizing with the prolific prescribing, thinking that folks were getting a prescription medication that would help to mitigate pain, but what it did was it helped people to feel less pain here and here. And so that psychic pain, that trauma, that was relieved for a period of time, and then you wanted to seek that relief. Addiction is a coping skill. And when we help people to transform that pain, that's what healing looks like. There's a process involved in that. First, you have to name it. And you have to bring it out into the light and recognize what's causing that pain. And then you go through a process that is cathartic. It starts with accountability, and it sits on a bed of trust. And I can't help but think about the parallel process that is happening right now. There is accountability. There is a nascent foundation of trust being built between the healthcare industry and the people who we serve. And that catharsis can begin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have, in the state of Connecticut, I think we're very fortunate to have some scaffolding that represents the healthcare system, including healing of all types. But the behavioral healthcare system has been woefully under-resourced for a very long time. And so for us to be able to do that healing work, which is difficult, and when it's done well, it involves entire systems, whole families, communities. That requires resources. And so what I am hopeful about today is that this is the beginning of that healing.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you for fighting.
Well, thank you all, and with that, I'm happy to take questions.
It was reported that there was a supermajority of attorney generals that did agree to this new $6 billion settlement among the 9 that held out, but that there were 1 or 2 that still wanted more. Were you one of them?
I wanted more. I still want more. But I took it as far as we could take it. And if we were to continue, we would do it alone. And that is untenable.
The 30 million documents that'll also be made public, can you just sort of characterize what kind of documents these are? And what we might
These are documents that, speaking of catharsis, part of this is getting to the truth of what happened, you know, over all the obfuscations, right, and spin that we've heard from the Sacklers, from Purdue, from other bad actors in the addiction industry. Part of this is getting to a process, frankly, where we get some truth and some reconciliation about how so many people died from something that was supposed to help them. And so as part of this agreement, 30 million documents will be released, many of which were previously claimed to be privileged. And so I think we'll really get to see how this could have happened. Because I think a lot of people and a lot of victims and survivors and their families struggle to understand how this could happen when doctors and pharmaceutical companies were ostensibly doing this to help them.
How does somebody actually go about claiming the money? I mean, you mentioned that you're going to set up a trust, and what's sort of the process for doing that, and then how soon can somebody claim that?
So there's a process in the bankruptcy court now, and many people, including many people in Connecticut, and I've heard from a lot of people who wanted me to agree to this agreement. they've made claims in the bankruptcy court, and they will be paid according to that process. In terms of a Connecticut Opioid Survivors Trust, this agreement authorizes Connecticut to do that, and so we haven't set that up yet, but I'll be working with these families to try to figure out a way to best deliver that to the families that need it the most. So those details are yet to be sketched.
So how much of this does Connecticut get?
Connecticut gets close to $100 million from this recovery. Total, since I became Attorney General, more than $400 million.
And what's the time frame for that?
This will be paid in part upfront and then in part over 18 years.
Okay, so the original timeline you said was 9 years, correct?
Right, so that doesn't change, correct? And then the new money, there's some money front-loaded and then the rest of it over 18 years. Like the distributor settlement, by the way.
You've talked a lot about that the Sacklers have shifted money around over the years.
Yep.
That's pretty well documented. It seems like, given that, $6 billion is chump change to this family. Do you feel like the family still has large amounts of assets that now you'll never be able to get to?
Is the family still wealthy? Absolutely. And does the family still have money squirreled away around the world? I'm sure that they do. You know, we pushed as hard as we could, used every tool in our toolbox to pursue them. And I don't think $6 billion is chump change to people here in Connecticut. It's not chump change to families who are suffering right now. It's a historic recovery. And, you know, I'm incredibly frustrated by this. You know, frankly, having to sit here right now, I want to keep fighting too.
Does this settlement clarify in any way some of the many questions about the use of bankruptcy law? Now, obviously, this is an incredibly complex case as to how assets were moved around, but the basic principle of wealthy people using corporate shield or other business entities is not. So can you give us a sense of to what extent does this really change the rules of the road in that regard?
It doesn't change the rules of the road, and in fact, it preserves that fight. That fight continues right now. And so, sorry. So just technically, there was a plan. We appealed, overturned that plan, and vacated it. And so then Purdue appealed. That appeal is live. And the Department of Justice will be in that appeal asserting that non-consensual, non-debtor releases are not lawful.
Okay, and I probably phrased that inartfully.
Yep.
Rules of the road. But is there anything in this settlement that sets aside some of the techniques that the Sacklers were using in bankruptcy court and through other shifting around of assets?
It does not.
Okay, thank you.
And do you feel like this blazes the trail perhaps to hold other pharmaceutical companies accountable that might have been pushing these drugs, knowing the impacts that it could have and would have on its patients?
Yeah, I can assure you that the addiction industry, to the extent that they have not yet been the target of an investigation or a prosecution or a lawsuit or a settlement, are painfully aware of what states are doing and what we're capable of. And as I've said many times, it's not just Purdue, it's not just the Sacklers, it's not just the 3 largest drug distributors, frankly, in the world, and Johnson & Johnson. There are many more bad actors, and we will continue to pursue all of them. And all of them know that we won't stop until we hold them as accountable as we can.
And for the families, just to kind of turn more from you guys started like hiding back here, I mean, do you feel, kind of going back to those, painful initial moments, do you feel like you were deceived in some way, that they were giving you something that they knew was bad, that shouldn't have been prescribed to people in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The way they marketed it in their plan was just horrific. It was evil. They took into no accountability what they were actually doing to people. They had no regard for human life. I mean, my son was 16 years old when he was prescribed that. These kids got their hands on it in school. They were playing with a pill. Then they end up going to Hartford and getting heroin. I mean, they would never put needles in their arms. This is all because of them. They knew the damage. They didn't care.
And do you feel like now they care? Do you
No,
feel like they're
ever.
listening?
No, I don't. I think they're just looking to say, here, make this go away, here's your money.
Liz, what do you think your two sons would say right now?
You go, Mom. Keep fighting. So my boys would say, you go, Mom.
He sure would.
That's great, Tong, and from Ms. Snyder, Ms. Fitzgerald, Paul Schotter, Connect Media. A lot of people have said, or I've heard personally just like through the years of this, that while the litigation is important, the only thing that could even begin to hold accountable Purdue and the Sacklers would be criminal prosecution, which of course is allowed. What is the position, viewpoint of each of the three of you regarding the possibility of criminal prosecution?
People should go to jail. People should go to jail.
The other night when they called to tell me about the settlement, that was the one question I had. I said, so there still will be able to be criminally prosecuted, and I was assured that, you know, even though that's not the vehicle for this particular office, but that is still open in the future, and they should go to jail.
And without saying things I'm not allowed to say, you know, this office is in constant communication with the Department of Justice on all these issues. And as I said at the beginning, I joined Senator Blumenthal in his call for the Department of Justice to investigate and, where appropriate, file criminal charges against people that are responsible, including members of the Sackler family. I don't have that authority.
Is there an open investigation right now by the Department of Justice or other federal law enforcement?
I can't comment on that.
What, you can't comment, or do you not know the answer?
I can't comment on that.
Sort of dovetailing on that, though, these 30 million documents that are going to come out, are these documents that will be new to criminal investigators, or have they already seen them?
I expect that there'll be documents they haven't seen before.
What is the viability of Purdue Pharma going forward? So they're out of the opioid business here, they're out of the drug business in total overseas? Did I hear that correctly?
So they have to sell, so Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers are technically different. I've argued that they're one and the same, but they are technically different. The Sacklers own international businesses generally referred to as Mundi Pharma. They have to sell that and get out of it, okay? And this is part of the original plan, but this is an important feature of this plan. Purdue Pharma has to get shut down. That's part of the bankruptcy plan. There will be a new company that will be a public benefit corporation that will take what remaining assets there are of Purdue Pharma, and then the asset of OxyContin as a product, as a medication, will be phased out over the next few years because it goes off patent, I don't know, in the next several years. Is that right, Matt?
I forget exactly.
Yeah.
At the time it was
Yeah.
What do you make of the fact of Purdue Pharma now getting into the naloxone and Narcan business?
Well, again, it's not going to be Purdue Pharma. It's a totally different company, and Purdue Pharma will be gone. My personal feeling is that it's absurd that a company that profited off of the abuse of a medication that it produced and that caused the death and destruction of so many people and families is now attempting to profit off of a remedy or treatment for that drug. And I've said that many times. I think it's absurd.
So with this announcement, what's the next step in the process?
So the next step in the process will be for us to figure out how to establish the Connecticut Opioid Survivors Trust. It will be to get the opportunity for victims and survivors and their families to speak in court to the Sacklers and to force the Sacklers to listen. It will be to continue to support, to the extent that we can, any other law enforcement authorities in actions that they may take. We'll continue to push Congress. I testified before Congress to get Congress to pass the Sackler Act, which would bar the use of non-consensual, non-debtor releases and the abuse of our nation's bankruptcy laws. And we will continue, to the extent that we are allowed, to support efforts by the Department of Justice as they continue their appeal.
Can you just reiterate your objection to that non-debtor, non-consensual releases? I mean, we all know what you're talking about, but for those
Yeah.
who are...
So the objection is this. Everybody understands that we have bankruptcy laws that allow people and companies to declare bankruptcy because they can't pay their bills, because they're bankrupt. And a court steps in and says, okay, how much money do you have left? I'm going to figure out what you owe, and I'm going to distribute your assets. That's bankruptcy. And in many cases, a company or an individual can emerge from bankruptcy having had their debts extinguished and discharged, and then they can go on with their lives. And companies are no different than people in the ability to do that. I don't think you had to go to law school, right, to know that bankruptcy laws are for people and companies that are bankrupt, not for people that are unbelievably wealthy, okay? And it shocked me, right, and it shocked the conscience of many people that the Sacklers were able to step in the bankruptcy of the company to shield themselves when nobody thinks for a second that they're bankrupt. That's the abuse. It was the ability of the Sacklers to say to the court, we're going to put some money in, and in exchange for us putting money into the company's bankruptcy, you're going to force the states and other victims and survivors to release us, to give us a lifetime of immunity. And it was an effort to cram down a settlement to which we objected. And we said, that's not okay, that's not lawful, and that's why I appealed, and we won.
You said people should go to jail. I mean, what people?
I think people who are responsible should go to jail.
You know, who's responsible?
I'll leave that to the criminal authorities. Anybody else? Thank you all for being here today.
Can you just say your names for the record?
Sure. Attorney General William Tong.
Paige Niver.
Can you spell that, please?
Sure, Paige, P-A-I-G-E, Niver, N-I-V-E-R.
And you are from?
Manchester, Connecticut.
Liz?
Yes, Liz Fitzgerald, F-I-T-Z-G-E-R-I-L-D.
Capital G or small g?
No, small g.
Okay. And you are in what town? Again?
Southington, Connecticut.
Thank you.
Maria Coutant Skinner, it's a lot, M-A-R-I-A, C-O-U-T-A-N-T-S-K-I-N-N-E-R, and I'm the CEO at the McCall Center for Behavioral Health.
So let me just wrap up and say again, this work continues. As you know, last week we got the final go-ahead on the distributor settlement and Johnson & Johnson from AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, McKesson, and Johnson & Johnson that they would move forward with a $26 billion settlement. That settlement was agreed to by all cities and towns here in Connecticut. If you add that plus this resolution and a settlement with McKinsey over their role in advising Purdue Pharma, in which they paid close to $600 million, that totals $32.5 billion just in the past year, and we're not done. So we'll continue to fight, and again, I want to thank the families for being here. Thank you.